Going through the basics of layer effects here, I'm just going to grab my image up here and I'm just going to start with the layer effects. Two different ways you can get to that layer effect. You can double click on your layer, which you always do, and it always comes up with this, and you simply dismiss it. But this layer effect right here has all of the buttons that you can go ahead and click. And it's the same thing as clicking on your layer effects down here, choosing one, and it calls up the exact same layer style dialog box. And you may not have ever paid attention to it, but this is the layer style dialog box with a hint on style. Okay? Yes, I know, because we have this weird window palette under here that has the same name. Okay, so I'm going to double click on my layer and I'm going to call up all of my styles, and I'm going to be able to go through here and it's hard to take this seriously, isn't it? So here's my layer styles, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to run through these styles fairly quickly. So first and foremost, I'm going to start off with my bevel and emboss. People have used bevel and emboss, and we have our depth, which controls the depth of our bevel, and then the size of this, which is going to be kind of the angles right there. We can do the up or down, which, by the way, only just shifts the highlight from one side to the other. That's all it is. And the size is just going to create more angles, and then I can go ahead and do the soften, so it's just going to kind of do the soft edges so no one gets hurt. But we also have the ability here to do an inner bevel as well as an outer bevel. Okay, so it kind of looks like it's raised above the surface. It is defaulting to inner bevel, which is going to take anything inside and bevel it to the inside. We can also do the emboss, which is kind of cool because then it kind of gives this kind of little pillow style, but we actually do have pillow emboss, which is really cool. So it looks like it actually comes down, drops into the surface, and then the object is flush with that surface too. And then, of course, with the pillow, after the pillow emboss, we have the stroke emboss, which is if we have a stroke around an object, it will actually emboss the stroke as well. So let's just go ahead and put a stroke on there for now so we can see that. And there's our stroke. Let's get a different color so we can actually see what's going on. There we go. So if we put a stroke in there and we do our bevel and emboss and we do a stroke emboss, that will go ahead and emboss just the stroke itself. Pretty cool. So of course the depth is not going to be affected much when we do the stroke emboss, but on a normal, basically inner bevel here, the depth is going to allow us to adjust. There's our size, up and down, like that, soften as we go. Most people are like, okay, that's really cool. But what we end up with, I'm going to turn off my stroke at this point, what we end up with is we end up the typical highlights and shadows. Okay? Highlight coming from the upper left, shadow coming from the lower right. We don't have to, because with a bevel and emboss here, we don't deal with just a singular direction of light like we would a drop shadow. We have our object, light comes in the upper left, shadow cast down to the lower right, and it just simply casts it off. We have this really cool shading right here. And in some of these, like we have with the drop shadow, it's just simply a line that radiates from the middle, and we just kind of run the line around this little circle. And it just basically controls the angle that the light comes from. With this, we can go ahead and we can control this, but this little dot here also allows us to control the light kind of overhead. So it doesn't just say, okay, it's coming from over here, it's coming from over here. It allows us to come up over the top of our object here. So if I drag my little dot to the top of the object, now it's actually shining from directly up above. But wait a second, why is it changing this one over here? I'm not using that one, I'm on this layer, why is it changing this one? Because of global light. Like global warming happens everywhere. Global light means that it's actually affecting every single thing in that document. As one client argued with me, it's fine to have a drop shadow coming from the left and having a drop shadow coming from the light in two products in the exact same image. No, it's not. Okay? We have a lot of crazy things in this world, but two opposite light sources forming two different shadows doesn't work. So global light basically makes sure that all of the direction of your light is going to be consistent throughout your entire document. That's really handy, but it can also be really tricky because as you see, it begins to change the overall effect of everything that is based on the direction of the light. So you got to be really careful on when you're using this and when you're not. It's on by default, which is fine. You shift the drop shadow over, you would like everything in your document to then shift the drop shadow over to the other side. Makes sense. So I'm going to run this around and you can see how that changes. Sure it does, but just the effect of going up over the top of this really can have an interesting effect on this whole thing, and it's the exact same inner bevel. Okay? So we get into a lot of different combinations of these things really, really, really quickly. I'm just going to bump this off to the side here so we get a little bit more of a cast right here. And I'm also going to control how this bevel is going to appear. Right now it's just a very soft bevel, and we control the depth of the bevel. But I can do a chiseled hard surface, which is going to make it kind of nice and hard and button-like, and I can also do a chiseled soft as well. So it can affect these things differently, all depending on the angle of the light. If I go ahead and I do it really big, so there's chisel soft, there's chisel hard, can't see much difference on these particular ones. So there's my global light, and I can control the direction, and I can control the altitude of that too, and you can get some cool, cool stuff with it. And a lot of times people look and they're like, how did you do that? Well, a lot of the times it's just going in and messing around. Now, we're going to show you later on how we can get these all together, but if you ever want to learn anything about these cool effects that you see, go online. Tens of thousands of people have posted videos and all these cool things, and it's getting everything dialed in just right. As you can see, there's millions of combinations, and we haven't even gotten halfway through bevel and emboss. So then, what I'd like to control is, not only am I going to control the direction of the light here, but I'm going to control what's called the gloss contour. And I know it sounds really funky. It isn't. The gloss contour, when we click on this, is just basically saying how it's going to look on how the light reflects off those particular surfaces. And right now, I just have an angled surface. That's all. So the light just comes and reflects off an angled surface. It just bounces right off. But what happens if I have a surface like this that kind of is going to go in and allow different types of light reflection to be bounced off the surface differently, so that basically what I'm doing is I'm controlling the quality of the surface to give it a different type of light refraction off the surface. And what's cool with this is I can actually go in and I can make this cool little bumpy thing kind of make it look like a gemstone. Because what it's doing is it's causing the light to reflect off, these different parameters, which is actually pretty cool. So I can get kind of a plasticky effect, I can get kind of more like an emerald effect and this glowing effect, all by going in and changing these gloss contours. So you're like, wow, I've got all these choices. You have more. Anytime you see this little gear right there, that's going to allow you to go ahead and import ones that you've created, import ones that other people have created, or get the entire stash of ones that are already built into Photoshop. So I can go in and I can load the contours, I can save contours. Right here in this particular one, Photoshop doesn't have anything more than this particular list of contours that it has. But they have other ones in here, so we're going to show you that. But this is where you're going to go in and you're going to find a list of brushes, styles, everything else. Anytime you see that little gear there, that's your hidden little thing. So if you download something online where somebody's got a really cool gloss contour, this is where you're going to put it in. You're going to save it to your hard drive, you're going to go under Load, and you're going to navigate to where that is, and it's going to load that contour, that surface contour in there. And you can then create that cool effect. So we're going to go back here. And now we're also dealing with how the light is going to hit this. And it's not just the way the light's hitting it, that's the contour, but what color of light we're going to use. Right now we basically have white light hitting the highlights there, but what happens if we're in a room where we want blue light hitting the highlights? Here's my little box, I can click on that and I can click on blue and say, yeah, you know what, I want blue as a highlight coming in there. But then, how do I want this blue to actually be affected? I can control the opacity of this blue light. Plus, if you know anything about blending modes, I can have these 30-odd blending modes on how that light is now going to react with the surface of my object. I know. It's like doing your taxes. Yes, right. So we aren't really going to get into blending modes that much today. We have an entire class on blending modes and how they all work, but just a quick little idea of how these blending modes are split out. So if you go in here, you'll see these lines that are broken in between. The darken right here is basically what all these are going to do based on colors that are lighter or darker. But the majority of these things are going to cause a darkening effect. The majority of these are going to cause a lightening effect. an overlay effect, so it's going to kind of like cancel out or mix colors together here. The difference, so it's going to add or subtract things. And then this is all going to be your basic hues. So if you don't know what you're looking for, you can at least look at the very top here and say, okay, anything here is going to darken my colors, anything here is going to lighten my colors in different ways. And this is then going to overlay, so I'm going to get this combination of colors right here, and then this is going to add or subtract, so I get a difference between, and then affect all my colors. So for those of you that had no idea what goes on there, that's just kind of a little overview of what you've got. So I can control this light and just say, okay, make it normal light right there and have it show up on there, or I can say, no, make it darken, make it lighten, screen it, whatever. And then my shadow here, same way. How do I want my shadow to be cast? Well, I can cast that shadow as a very dark color, I can cast it as a very light color, I could make it as a green, and then it will cast kind of as a green shadow on my bevel right there. And so if I go back just to my normal contour, I can have it lighten with blue, kind of shadow mode, with a little bit of green there. I can really bump that up, and you can see that the green is then going to multiply on top of the red. And then I can do that, and I can kind of get a little bit of blue hinting on the side right there. So I can control the light. You can see that, you know, it's got a little bit of blue added on there because I have it lightened, so it's going to lighten that. If I go to the darken mode there, then the blue is simply going to go in and darken that as I go. So that's the general ideas of going in and using these right there. So you can also see this little preview window right here, if it's a little bit hard to see of what's going on. We've done an awful lot, but these preview windows basically show you what's happening from these items. Now you think, okay, we're done with the bevel and emboss. No, we aren't, okay? All we did was we just set the bevel and the emboss and then the way the light hits the surface. That's it. But we also have two subsets here of the bevel and emboss, and this one is the contour, and this one is the texture. So with this, if I go on to the contour here, this is different than the gloss contour. The gloss contour is how the light reflects off the surface. Do you want it to be plastic? Do you want it to be metal? Do you want it to look kind of, you know, stone-like, so it's super highly reflective? That's the way the light reflects off the surface. And that is your gloss contour. Gloss, matte, shiny, that's that. The actual contour is the surface itself. So here I can go in and I can control the surface, which will literally change the surface to match this particular contour. So no longer is my red box just a red box. If you were to look at the profile here, it actually has this up and down, which gives us these little ribs on here, okay? So I can do all this other stuff. I can do the little stacked pyramid, things like that, little jagged, the little round. So if I want to have it kind of like a nice little puffy pillow right there, I can do that, awesome. And this is where I can get multiple contours from my little drop-down menu. And I want to load my contours, and I want to append. And now I can go in and get tons more contours here that I normally wouldn't have. And these are all built into Photoshop. Okay? So when you see something that's really wild and crazy and wacky, and it's like, oh my gosh, how did you build that? Well, didn't. It's just literally a red box with all these different things being imagined. Now, most people don't ever get past the bevel and emboss. They think, ooh, button up, button down. Wow, ooh, look at it go. So you can do all these great things. Light reflection off it from any direction that you want, left, right, top, bottom, overhead. The colors of the light that are going to be reflected, the colors of the light that are going to be shadowed, and how that light is going to interact with your object. Then you can change your contour of the actual shape. Right now, the default is simply set to beveled edge. You know, we always thought that was so cool. And now, 10 minutes into this, you're like, that is so boring. You know, who needs to deal with a beveled edge? We need something awesome. I mean, that looks pretty cool. Yeah, right there, that little inverted little ashtray. Sure. So we can then add a texture to this as well. So any type of texture, and a texture is nothing more than a grayscale image. Okay? So if you get a grayscale image, you can actually create your own textures and patterns and put them in here, and we have some of them in here. And we can actually apply these textures on top of our object and our map here. So I can get this really cool, if I make this a copper color, I could actually make this look like it's a little copper thing in here that's all been nicely hammered and all done like that. Yeah, of course we can. I know. Who'd have thought you could ever get past a bevel and emboss and a drop shadow and still look really cool? I know. I know. So again, if you want patterns here, you click on that little gear, and here are all the textures and patterns in here, okay? So this is just the very basics. There's hundreds, if not thousands of these, ones that you can make, ones that you can download as well. I don't have time to show you how to make them today, but they are available, and literally they just come in as an image. They are just captured as an image and saved in here. So if you have erodible textures and you append right there, these are all your different erodible textures. I mean, shag carpet, you know, those little things that your parents used to put under that chair so that you didn't like scrape up the floors. Yeah, that's what they are. There you have it. So that's the bevel and emboss feature right there. There was just bevel and emboss. And when you're going through these particular items here, this is something that people get caught up on every once in a while. Just because I go in and I turn on or turn off something here doesn't mean I actually have it selected. It's kind of weird. So if I turn off my contour here, and then I go and turn off my texture and then turn my texture on, I'm not actually on texture. I actually have to physically click on the word to see it highlighted there, okay? It's a two-step process. A couple other places in Photoshop you have to do that. Clicking on it isn't enough like a layer. You have to not only click on it, but also make it visible. So keep that in mind when you're using those. So there's my bevel and emboss on my object, right there. Far beyond just flat sides, you know, light source, that's it. Pretty sweet.